Bam! How's going? Welcome again. It is your boy TJ, and today we are talking about equity. And I think a lot of people always wants to get that equity out for some reason or the other. But today we are going to be discussing the whole conversation of, do you actually really need to take this equity? Or maybe let me just say, what do you do once you have equity? A few days ago, I did another video where I demonstrated to you how you could actually get equity. And if you haven't watched that video, I think maybe that's your starting point. So today I'm going to make an assumption that you now have equity. Where? In your business, hopefully. In your personal name, well, we're going to talk about that. But before I jump on, let's define what equity is all about. For some of you who are new, my name is TJ. Welcome to the TJ Money Show. And we talk about anything and everything around money, especially money that is being made from real estate or property. Now, let us say that you have just acquired some equity onto a property that you own. But let's define it. What is equity? Equity is the difference of the value of your property based on how much you own, or, right? So basically it is the value, subtract how much you owe, the difference thereof, that is what is called equity. And basically, if you have, the more equity you are, the more richer you are in an asset. So for some people, they want to utilize this equity, and I'm going to give you two scenarios into how best you can utilize this equity. Well, you don't have to utilize it. It's like having money in your bank account, right? But this time round, you have the same money in an asset, which is quite a cool thing. Because if you're to really look at money in the bank, as your money is appreciating or gaining value, or the interest that you can be getting at the bank, right? Compared to money that is sitting on an asset, the appreciation, the growth of it, it's generally higher than what you could be getting at a bank. But it also depends with the different products. So don't take my word on it. Rather go out there and do some investigations. If you had R1 million on an asset and you got R1 million in the bank, and if you're both going to live them for the next 5 to 10 years, what does that look like? You do the maths, you do the assumptions, like for like, is it the same? And if one beats the other, that's where you want to put your money. But that's not the conversation today. The conversation today is very much around the equity releasing. How do you release it, right? A lot of people have called me and says, TJ, I bought my property 5 years ago. I want to release equity. Help me, please. And I say to them, well, there is no equity, but there might be an equity. So let's cover that again. Recap on the last video. Number one, you might have put in a bit of a deposit on a property. You bought R1 million for R1 million, right? And you put a 20% deposit, so 200,000. So the value of that property is sitting now at R1 million. And this 200 now is basically the equity that you've got. Now you've got this property for 5 years. Potentially your equity is still the same, because most banks, what they do is they want to pay off what is called the interest before you can start paying off your capital. So in this example, we will say that you have 200,000, right? So you bought it in your personal name. If you bought it in your personal name, that 200,000, it's basically how much you are worth. That's your equity. So how best can you release that? Well, simply pick up the phone and you call your bank and you ask the bank to re-evaluate your property. But by doing that, they're not just going to say, Mr. Jones, there you are. There is the R1 million, or should I say the 200,000 that is the equity. They would obviously want to understand whether you qualify for this R1 million. they would obviously want to see whether you can afford to pay for that now extra 200,000. If the answer is yes, and also the bank might just reconsider their risk in that area. So in some areas, they might not want to go all full on 100%. In some areas, they want to go a little bit 80, 60. It all depends with the risk of the area. So a combination of all of these things that I've just spoken about now becomes a yes to your 200,000, and all of a sudden you have just released your equity. Does that make sense? Bingo, high five. In the comments, let me know whether this is making sense to you, and if you got any questions around this particular topic, then let me know. I want to jump on to scenario number 2. It's gonna get complicated as we go along, but that's fine. I'm hoping that you're following. And if it's not really making sense, maybe you need to engage with some proper education around this. But let me not go there. You know me, I am always saying to you, get educated, get educated. Because remember, back in the days, this guy here was not anywhere like this. I got educated and I'm still learning. The more I'm earning, the more I am making money. All right, good. Scenario number 2, that's what I want us to talk about. In this scenario, I am going to talk about some savvy investors, people that have now moved away from buying properties in their names, and they are now buying these properties in their company. And because they understand that the risk is limited to them if they're buying it in a company, and they are separating themselves from the company from themselves to the company. So it's 2 different entities, right? Now, let's assume that the same thing has happened. R1 million property, and now you've got this 200,000. What else can you do? Well, the same scenario that we spoke about, where you can call the bank, you can do that, right? So I won't talk about that because you can do that, owning it in a company. But the second scenario that I want us to talk about now you have a company, is that now your company's value has changed, right? I know I'm introducing something new here. So remember, you have a property, the property has its own value, but the company also has its own value. So the company itself, because now it's got its own value, you can also go to the bank, and then the bank will evaluate either the property itself or the company itself. And then they can say to you, oh, well, we can give you 200 more. We can give you 400,000 more. Why? Because the value of the company is X. And for that reason, you would have just released that equity. That money does not get paid to you directly. So for in some banks, what normally happens is that there's actually an account, it might be a flexi account or things like that. They will release that money in the current bond that you have. Or in some cases, what they will do is they will pay you out, yes, in a designated account that you choose. Obviously, you just need to follow that paperwork, and there you are. So 2 ways in which you can then be able to release that money. But I want to throw in another caveat to you guys. For guys that are like super savvy, like they understand, sophisticated investors. And if you are one of those sophisticated investors, welcome aboard. I like to speak to you because you understand that what you're doing is beyond what you're doing today. Right, so we spoke about someone else who's got equity as an individual. That's one entity. And we spoke about someone else who has a property in a company, and then they have the equity in the company itself. But this time around, I am going to speak to a sophisticated investor and say, hey, now that you have this R1 million property, but it's sitting in a company, but you don't own that company, and maybe your trust owns that company, then what? Right. Now, I always say that each individual should have at least 2 trusts. And the one trust is where you have all of these businesses that you're doing. And within these businesses, basically what you're doing is you are building whatever that you're building today. You are building the empire, right? today. But it is exposed to all of these that are coming up. The banks are involved in there within your company and things like that. So I want to call that side of the trust company the building side. So that's with the trust number one. Many people might call it a business trust, whatever they call it, I don't care. But for me, the bottom line of it is that it is a trust in the company. Now you have your properties in there, and now you've got your equity, the 200,000 equity here. I don't want us to talk about many things to confuse them. I hope you're following. I hope you're following the process here. So now that I've said you need to have two trusts, so what are you going to do with the other trust? The other trust, I'm going to call it the preserve trust. So we've got the build trust, and then we've got the preserve trust. The build trust is associated with banks, debt, and all of those things. The preserve one is associated to nobody, right? It's everything else that you own cash. Now, the equity that you're going to be getting, that 200,000 that we spoke about, the same approach you take here is to go again to the bank, and you're kind of like refinancing. You're releasing that equity. However, when that 200,000 comes in, becomes available to you in company number one, where you are building, I will take that money and I'll move it across to my preserve, and I'm going to buy my 1 bed, 1 bath for 200,000, and that is cash owned, and that becomes my preserving. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know that this video could be a little bit complicated for many of us, but that's what it's all about. We learn as we grow. What I want us to re-emphasize on here is that you can release any equity, right? There are so many ways in which you can do it. I've just given you principles and around about 3 things in which you can do it. But the bottom line of it is that once you have the equity, what do you do with it? So you can release it so that you can buy another property, which is something that I like to do. Or you can release it so that you can be able to go and solve a problem. Maybe in your past, there was a problem that was there, so you can solve for that. So which means that your asset has just worked for you. But I hope that all of this information has been helpful. If it's not, if it was gibberish at all to you, and you're like saying, TJ, what the fudge were you talking about here, buddy? In the comments, let me know. You've got our email address, hello@tauraijack.com. You can let me know, but preferably, I generally just want to hear from you whether all of this stuff is making sense, because without you, why am I here? There is no reason at all. By the way, thank you for watching. Yeah, I really mean it. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching. But most importantly, spread the gospel. Make sure that you're not the only one who's watching this. And if it's been helpful, send it to someone else who will receive and be knowledgeable about this. I'm here today because of someone else who shared the information to me. So we'll check you out on the next video.